There is someone in your life right now who thinks about you more than you know. They haven't told you. They probably never will. And yet, you've changed something in them. The way they see themselves, the standard they hold themselves to, the quiet voice in the back of their mind that whispers, you could do better than this. You did all of that without knowing it, without trying, without even being in the room. And that is the strange, unsettling, beautiful truth we're going to talk about today. Because most people will spend their entire lives wondering why certain connections never happened. Why someone they felt drawn to never got close. Why the person who seemed to notice everything about them, every small detail, every quiet moment, never said a single word. The answer isn't what you think. It's not indifference. It's not disinterest. It's that what they felt was so significant, so threatening to the carefully constructed version of themselves they'd been protecting, that silence became the only option that felt safe. This video is about that silence, what it means, where it comes from, and why the people who admire you most are often the ones who will never let themselves get close to you. Let's start with something that nobody talks about. Admiration and envy are born in the exact same moment. When someone sees you, really sees you, and recognizes that you have something they want, two emotions fire simultaneously inside them. Researchers who study social comparison call this an upward comparison. You are above them in some dimension that matters to them. It could be your confidence, your clarity, the way you carry yourself, the way you don't apologize for who you are. And what happens inside them in that moment is not simple. It is not purely warm. It is a collision. Admiration on one side, a sharp sting of inadequacy on the other. They want to be near you, and they want to look away. Both at the same time. So they do neither. They stay exactly where they are. They watch. They say nothing. And you walk past them, completely unaware that you just became the measuring stick against which they quietly judge their own life. Now here's something a research team at the University of Buffalo discovered that should change the way you think about human attraction entirely. They found that the qualities people find most attractive in someone, intelligence, confidence, the sense that a person has truly figured something out, those qualities feel safe to admire from a distance. When someone is abstract, hypothetical, imagined, but the moment that same person is standing directly in front of them, those same qualities become threatening. The researcher leading the study described it this way. There is a fundamental disconnect between what people say they want when someone is unknown, and how they actually behave when that same person is in their immediate social world. Think about what that means for you. The version of you that exists in someone's imagination, the version they've been quietly watching, quietly cataloging, quietly admiring, that version feels beautiful and safe to them. It inspires them. It gives them something to reach toward. But you, in real life, asking them a direct question, standing close enough that they would have to respond authentically, that version of you is terrifying. Because it would require them to show up as a real person, and real people can be rejected. The fantasy can never reject them. You can. And this is where it gets even more interesting. Because when someone admires you in silence, they don't just passively notice you, they study you. Researchers who have examined the psychology of silent admiration found that the person doing the watching becomes what can only be described as a meticulous student of the one they're drawn to. They catalog your interests without meaning to. They remember things you said that you've already forgotten you said. They notice the way you handle a difficult moment, the way you treat people who can't do anything for you, the way your face changes when you talk about something you actually care about. All of it gets stored somewhere, filed away in an internal archive they never planned to create. Maybe it's your authenticity. Maybe it's the fact that you don't seem to be hiding. Maybe it's that you live in a way that reminds them of everything they buried a long time ago. And the terror isn't really about you. The terror is about what they would have to excavate inside themselves in order to be honest with you. Getting close to you doesn't just mean risking rejection. It means undoing years of carefully constructed distance from their own feelings. That is not a small thing. That is an act of psychological surgery. And most people, when faced with that choice, will choose the wall. Here's something that rarely gets talked about in conversations like this one. Some people, more than we realize, literally cannot identify what they feel when they're around you. There is a psychological condition called alexithymia. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're unfeeling. It means you have a measurably reduced ability to identify and articulate your own emotional states. You feel things, but the feeling arrives without a label, without a name, without a way to communicate it. Research has consistently found that alexithymia is strongly associated with fear of intimacy. Not because the person doesn't feel, but because they feel something enormous and have no language for it. So imagine, they're around you, and something happens inside them. Something real, something significant. But when they reach for the words, when they try to identify what this is, there's nothing there. Just a feeling that has no name, and therefore no path forward. So they stay silent, not because they chose silence, but because silence was the only thing available to them. Let's talk about what their behavior actually looks like. Because once you know what to look for, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. The silent admirer apologizes too much. Not because they've done something wrong, because they are preemptively smoothing over your judgment of them. Every sorry to bother you, and sorry if this is a dumb question, is a person saying, please don't see how nervous I am right now. They're not actually apologizing. They're managing their fear of how you see them. They fix themselves when you walk in, without even realizing it. They adjust, they straighten, they become slightly more deliberate in how they carry themselves. This isn't performance for your benefit. It's an unconscious attempt to be worthy of your proximity. To not be caught off guard by how much your presence affects them. This one is counterintuitive. You would think someone who admires your capabilities would want to learn from you. But research shows the opposite tends to happen. They'd rather struggle alone than expose their vulnerability to someone whose opinion of them actually matters. A stranger's judgment is weightless. Yours has gravity. And they remember everything. The small thing you mentioned once. The opinion you casually shared. The way you laughed at something. It all gets retained with a fidelity that would surprise you. Stored in that internal archive. Evidence of a deep attention that was never acknowledged out loud. Now I want to say something that might be uncomfortable. The same person who admires you in silence, if the distance is never closed, if the gap between where they are and where you seem to be keeps widening, that admiration has a shadow side it can transform into. Research on upward social comparison shows that envy and admiration live on the same spectrum. And when admiration becomes impossible to sustain, when the reminder of the gap becomes too painful, it can quietly shift into something darker. Not hatred, not malice. Something more subtle than that. A slight undercutting, a minimizing, a way of talking about you that makes the distance feel less humiliating. This is not about bad people. This is about people in pain who never found a way to close the space between who they are and who they want to be. You are not responsible for that, but you should understand it. Because it explains why some people who once clearly looked at you with warmth begin at some point to look at you with something else. They weren't pretending before. They just ran out of room to hold their admiration without it hurting them. Let's go deeper into why connection specifically terrifies them. Because it's not a vague, general fear. It's targeted. It's about you specifically. There's a concept in neuroscience that's worth understanding here. Vulnerability, genuine emotional openness, doesn't just feel risky. It activates actual brain regions, the ventral tegmental area, which is central to bonding, to the experience of connection, to the neurological feeling of belonging. It requires you to be open for it to activate. Which means that connection isn't just emotionally vulnerable, it's neurologically demanding. It asks the brain to do something it may have learned, through repeated experience, is unsafe. And here is what makes you specifically terrifying to the person who admires you silently. You matter. Their risk calculation isn't the same with you as it is with someone they feel neutral about. The higher someone's opinion is of you, the higher the stakes feel. The more your potential rejection would cost them. A stranger's rejection is noise, it fades. But the rejection of someone you've been quietly placing on a pedestal, that lands differently. That becomes evidence of something. And the part of them that has been collecting evidence against their own worthiness doesn't need any more material. So they protect themselves, they stay quiet, they stay away, and they tell themselves it's fine. Here's something I want you to sit with for a moment. Most of the impact you have on people happens in silence, in rooms where you weren't sure anyone was paying attention. The version of you that lives in a silent admirer's mind is often more powerful, more precise, and more influential than anything you've ever intentionally done. Because they've been watching the version of you that you don't perform. The version that shows up when you don't think it matters. The small choices, the private integrity, the way you handle something difficult without making it anyone else's problem. And here is what the research says that version of you has done to them. It made them want to improve. Studies on admiration consistently show that when someone genuinely admires another person, not envies them, not resents them, but admires them, it activates a motivation towards self-improvement. You became a benchmark, a silent standard, a voice in their head that says, you can do better than this, even though that voice is wearing your face and you never said a word. You have changed the trajectory of someone's life without ever knowing you were doing it. Probably more than once. Probably more times than you can count if they were ever honest with you. Let's talk about the attachment piece, because this is where the root system lives. Psychologists who study attachment, the way early relationships shape every relationship that follows, have found that avoidant attachment creates a very specific pattern. The person who has learned that closeness leads to pain, not through one dramatic event, but through a pattern of small moments where emotional need was met with distance, or withdrawal, or dismissal, that person doesn't stop wanting connection. They stop believing they can survive it. And so they develop a very particular skill: proximity without contact. They get close enough to feel the warmth of someone like you, close enough to observe, close enough to be in the same room, the same conversation, the same orbit, but not close enough to be truly seen. Because truly being seen, to them, has always led to the same outcome, and their nervous system has decided, without asking their permission, that it is not doing that again. This is not a choice they're making consciously. This is a body that learned something a long time ago, and has been enforcing it ever since. There is something else that most people miss about silent admiration. It carries grief. Not the kind of grief that comes after loss. The kind that comes from a loss that never even happened. From a connection that existed only inside one person. From a conversation that was never had. A closeness that was never risked. A life that was briefly imagined, and then quietly folded away. People who carry silent admiration for someone, and who never act on it, often describe, when they eventually name it, a kind of mourning. For what could have been. For who they might have been, if they'd been brave enough. For the version of the relationship that lived in their mind, and never got to find out if it was real. They are grieving a future they never let themselves have. And the painful irony is that the connection they're mourning often would have been possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. If they had taken one step, said one true thing, allowed themselves to be, just for a moment, genuinely visible. But they didn't. And so the grief compounds quietly, below the surface, while they continue to watch from where they are. I want to talk about what this means for you. Not the people who admire you, you. because there's something you need to understand about the kind of person who inspires this response in others. It is not an accident. It is not random. It is specific. The people who earn the deepest, quietest admiration are not the loudest ones in the room. They are not the ones performing. They are not the ones who have engineered themselves to be impressive. They are the ones who are consistent, who are real, who treat people who can't do anything for them with the same care they treat people who can, who make choices that nobody sees and would make the same choices if someone was watching, who seem to live from the inside out, from a set of values that exist independent of whether anyone is applauding. And what that does to the people around them is this: it creates a standard, an internal benchmark, a sense that it is possible to live differently, with more integrity, more intention, more authenticity. You become evidence that a different way of being is available. And that is both inspiring and terrifying. Because if you're proof that it's possible, then there's no excuse. And a lot of people are not ready to give up their excuses yet. Here's something worth considering. Younger people are particularly vulnerable to this pattern of silent admiration. Research on how we admire others found that the experience is especially intense for younger people, who are still forming their sense of self, still searching for what researchers call the perfect self, the model they're trying to become. You to them might represent an answer to a question they don't even know they're asking yet. What does a person look like when they've figured something out? When they're not apologizing for what they want? When they move through the world like it belongs to them, not because they're arrogant, but because they've simply decided to take up the space they were given? They're watching you learn how to be that. Or they're watching you already be that. And it's doing something to the shape of who they're becoming. You won't know, because they won't tell you. But the effect is real. The influence is real. Let me tell you what silence actually is in this context. Because silence, when it comes from admiration, is not neutrality. It is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something too large to fit into the available language. It is devotion that doesn't know what to call itself. It is respect that has nowhere to go. It is recognition of something in you that activates recognition of something in them. Something unfinished, something hopeful, something they haven't allowed themselves to want in a long time. Silence, in the psychology of admiration, is the sound a person makes when they feel something they don't have the courage to say. And here is what I think is important to remember. That silence was never really about you. Not about whether you were worthy of being approached. Not about whether you were approachable. Not about whether the connection would have been valuable. It was about whether they believed they were worth the risk of finding out. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with this. You are more seen than you know. You are more felt than you know. You are more influential than you know. There are people in your life. People in your past. People who have crossed your path briefly and then disappeared. Who carry a piece of you with them. Not because you tried to leave something behind, but because something in the way you exist caught in them like a light, and they couldn't shake it loose. They haven't told you. They may never tell you. But the fact that they haven't doesn't mean it isn't true. The fact that they stayed silent doesn't mean you weren't seen. It means they saw you so clearly that it changed something in them, and the change was too significant, too private, too close to the center of who they're trying to become to say out loud. That is not a small thing. That is, in its own quiet way, one of the most profound things one person can do to another. And you've been doing it, without trying, without knowing, this whole time.